If you've been dating a woman and she says certain things to you, I don't care how much you like her, you should take your shoes, your pride, and your sanity and leave. I'm not talking about small disagreements, occasional misunderstandings, or those moments when emotions run high and people say things they later regret. Every relationship has friction. Every couple will eventually step on each other's toes. That's normal. What I'm talking about today is something very different. I'm talking about specific phrases that reveal a deeper pattern. Words that quietly expose how someone truly sees you, how much they respect you, and what kind of future you're building together without even realizing it. The challenge is that most men don't recognize these warning signs when they first appear. Attraction has a way of blinding us. Loneliness can make us tolerate things we would normally reject. Hope convinces us that people will change. And because of that, many men spend years explaining away behaviors that should have been taken seriously from the beginning. They tell themselves, "She didn't mean it," or "She's just having a bad day." But psychology teaches us something important. Repeated words often reveal repeated beliefs, and repeated beliefs eventually become repeated behaviors. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever stayed in a relationship longer than you should have because you kept hoping things would get better? Have you ever ignored your gut feeling because you were afraid of losing someone you cared about? If that's happened to you, you're not alone. In fact, I'd love for you to share your experience in the comments. Your story might help another man recognize a pattern he's currently living through. And while you're listening today, pay attention not just to the words we're discussing, but to how those words made you feel when you heard them. I'm Mary Smith, host of Senior Mindful Living YouTube channel. One of the most fascinating things about female psychology, and human psychology in general, is that people rarely reveal their true intentions all at once. Most of the time, they reveal them in small moments. A casual comment, a teasing remark, a sentence delivered with a smile. And because the delivery feels harmless, we overlook the message hidden underneath. Think about it this way. Imagine you're driving down a road and you see a small crack in a bridge. You probably wouldn't panic, but if you kept seeing more cracks every mile, eventually you'd realize there's a structural problem. Relationships work the same way. One questionable comment might not mean much, but when certain phrases show up repeatedly, they're often revealing a deeper issue involving respect, empathy, accountability, or emotional maturity. Today we're going to explore 5 phrases that deserve your attention, not because they automatically mean the relationship is doomed, but because they can reveal unhealthy patterns that many people miss until it's too late. The first phrase is one that sounds surprisingly innocent. You're too sensitive. Now, let's be fair. Sometimes people genuinely can be overly sensitive in specific situations. We're all human. We all have insecurities and emotional triggers. But that's not what we're discussing here. We're talking about moments when you calmly communicate a legitimate concern, and the response you receive isn't understanding, curiosity, or accountability. Instead, it's dismissal. Imagine you've planned a special evening. You made reservations. You arranged your schedule. You showed up on time because you respect both your time and hers. Then she arrives 45 minutes late without any communication. Naturally, you mention that it bothered you. Instead of saying, "You're right, I should have called," she responds with, "Wow, you're too sensitive." Notice what just happened. The conversation instantly shifted away from her behavior and onto your reaction. Psychologists sometimes refer to this as a form of emotional invalidation. Rather than addressing the concern, the focus becomes making the other person question whether their feelings are legitimate. At first, this may seem minor, but repeated emotional invalidation creates long-term damage. Why? Because eventually you stop trusting your own emotions. You begin second-guessing yourself. You wonder if you're overreacting. You hesitate before expressing concerns. You start swallowing disappointments instead of discussing them. And over time, resentment quietly builds beneath the surface. I once heard a story from a man named Robert who spent nearly 8 years in a relationship where this dynamic became normal. Whenever he expressed frustration, disappointment, or concern, he was told he was being dramatic, emotional, or overly sensitive. Eventually, something strange happened. He stopped bringing up problems altogether. Not because the problems disappeared, because he no longer believed his feelings mattered. Think about that for a moment. The goal of a healthy relationship isn't to eliminate emotions, it's to understand them. A partner who respects you may not always agree with your feelings, but they should be willing to listen to them. That's a critical distinction. Respect doesn't mean agreement. Respect means consideration. If someone constantly treats your emotions as inconveniences, they're showing you something important about how they value your experience. Now here's where it gets even more interesting. Research in relationship psychology consistently shows that successful long-term couples develop something called emotional responsiveness. In simple terms, they respond to each other's emotional needs with attention and care. When one partner repeatedly dismisses the other, emotional intimacy begins to erode. And once emotional intimacy disappears, the relationship often starts operating on autopilot. You're together physically, but disconnected emotionally. That's why this phrase deserves attention, not because it's always malicious, but because repeated dismissal is often a symptom of deeper problems. The second phrase is equally damaging, though it often arrives disguised as motivation. You should be more like the comparison game. Very few things damage confidence faster than constantly being measured against someone else. Maybe it's an ex-boyfriend, maybe it's a coworker, maybe it's a friend, maybe it's even a celebrity. The specific person doesn't matter. The message does. The message is, who you are right now isn't enough. Let's imagine a scenario. You've been working overtime for months trying to provide stability for your family. You're exhausted. You're carrying responsibilities that nobody sees. One evening, she casually says, "You know, David's husband still finds time to work out every day." On the surface, it sounds harmless. But beneath the surface, a comparison has been made. And comparisons have power. Psychologically, comparisons trigger something called social evaluation. Human beings naturally compare themselves to others. But when those comparisons come repeatedly from someone whose approval matters to us, the effect becomes magnified. You start questioning yourself. You start competing against people who aren't even in the relationship. You begin chasing approval instead of building connection. The irony is that attraction often decreases when this happens. Why? Because confidence grows when people feel accepted and valued. Confidence shrinks when people constantly feel inadequate. A healthy partner encourages growth without using shame. That's worth repeating. A healthy partner encourages growth without using shame. There's a massive difference between saying, "I believe in you and I know you're capable of more," and saying, "Why can't you be like someone else?" One inspires, the other diminishes. I remember hearing about a couple who had been married for over 20 years. During an interview, the husband was asked what made their marriage successful. His answer was simple. "My wife never tried to turn me into another man. That doesn't mean she ignored his flaws. It means she helped him grow while still appreciating who he was." That's what healthy support looks like. The danger of constant comparison isn't just that it hurts, it's that it changes how you see yourself. Eventually, you stop asking, "Am I becoming the best version of me?" and start asking, "Am I becoming the version of me that earned someone else's approval?" Those are very different questions. One leads to personal growth, the other leads to self-abandonment. And that's a road no one should travel. Now let's move into a phrase that's becoming increasingly common in modern relationships, and one that often creates confusion because it can sound empowering on the surface. "I don't need you." Let's unpack this carefully. There's absolutely nothing wrong with independence. Healthy adults should be capable of taking care of themselves. In fact, strong relationships are usually built by two independent people choosing to share their lives together. The issue isn't independence. The issue is the message behind the statement. Imagine spending years supporting someone emotionally, being there during difficult moments, celebrating their victories, helping them navigate challenges, showing loyalty and consistency, and then hearing, "I don't need you." How does that land emotionally? For many people, it feels less like independence and more like rejection. Because relationships aren't built on necessity, they're built on appreciation. The strongest relationships often operate from a mindset of, "I could survive without you, but life is better with you." That's very different from, "You don't really matter." Words matter because they shape emotional reality. When someone repeatedly emphasizes how replaceable you are, the emotional connection begins to weaken. Not overnight, but gradually. One interaction at a time. One conversation at a time. One dismissive comment at a time. And here's something many people don't realize. Feeling valued is one of the most powerful emotional needs human beings have. It's not weakness, it's psychology. We all want to know that our presence makes a difference. We all want to know that our efforts are appreciated. We all want to feel seen. When those needs go unmet for long periods, relationships start losing their emotional foundation. And that's exactly where we'll continue in part 2. because the next two phrases are even more revealing, and one of them has quietly destroyed countless relationships while disguising itself as proof of love. When someone repeatedly tells you, "I don't need you," over time it stops sounding like confidence and starts feeling like emotional distance. And in relationships, emotional distance is often the beginning of the end long before any official breakup ever happens. Let's go deeper into what this actually does to a man's psychology. When effort is not acknowledged, when presence is not valued, and when emotional contribution is treated as optional, something subtle begins to shift. A man doesn't always leave immediately, most don't. Instead, they slowly withdraw their emotional investment. Not because they want to, but because human psychology naturally avoids environments where effort feels meaningless. This is where many relationships begin to quietly deteriorate. Not through arguments, not through betrayal, but through emotional disconnection. Now let's move to the fourth phrase, one of the most psychologically powerful and often misunderstood in modern relationships. If you loved me, you would. At first glance, this phrase may sound like a simple expression of emotional need. After all, people in relationships do express desires. They ask for time, attention, support, reassurance. That's normal. But the difference lies in how the request is framed. Because this phrase is not a request, it is a test. It places your love on trial. It removes choice and replaces it with pressure. And psychologically, this creates what experts call emotional coercion. Instead of openly communicating a need, the statement corners the other person into proving their love through compliance. Imagine this scenario. You've had a long week. You're exhausted. You finally take a quiet evening to rest. Then you hear, "If you loved me, you would cancel your plans and come see me." In that moment, the issue is no longer about time or connection. It becomes about guilt. And guilt is one of the most powerful emotional triggers in human behavior. Many men respond in the same way. They give in. Not because they truly want to, but because they don't want to be seen as uncaring. They don't want conflict. They don't want emotional tension. But every time you respond to emotional pressure instead of genuine mutual agreement, something important happens. You begin to train the dynamic. You teach that love can be leveraged. You teach that boundaries are negotiable under emotional pressure. And over time, this creates imbalance. A healthy relationship does not require emotional tests. It requires communication. There is a massive difference between saying, "I miss you and I'd really love to see you tonight," and saying, "If you loved me, you would." One invites connection, the other demands compliance. And that distinction is everything. Now, let's talk about a real psychological pattern behind this behavior. In many cases, people who use this kind of phrasing are not necessarily trying to manipulate in a conscious, calculated way. Instead, they may have learned this communication style from past relationships, family dynamics, or emotional environments where love was conditional. But regardless of intention, the impact remains the same, because relationships are not defined by intent alone. They are defined by effect. And if the effect of a behavior is emotional pressure, guilt, and boundary erosion, then the relationship slowly becomes unbalanced. Now we move to the fifth and final phrase, and this one is especially important because it often sounds like confidence, humor, or even flirtation. You're lucky to have me. At first, this might sound playful. It might even be said with a smile, a joke, or in a teasing tone. But psychologically, this phrase can carry a deeper message about hierarchy in the relationship. It subtly shifts the emotional structure. Instead of two equal partners choosing each other, it creates the idea that one person is the prize and the other is merely fortunate to be included. And over time, that shift matters. Because relationships thrive on mutual value, not emotional ranking. Let's imagine how this might show up in everyday life. You put effort into planning a date. You choose a place she likes. You show up on time. You put thought into the experience. And instead of appreciation, you hear something like, "You're lucky I even agreed to come out with you." Even if said jokingly, repeated exposure to this mindset begins to reshape how you see yourself in the relationship. You begin to feel like you are constantly trying to earn your place. Instead of being valued, you are auditioning. Instead of being chosen, you are competing. And psychologically, that dynamic creates anxiety, not attraction. Because attraction requires emotional safety, not emotional uncertainty. Now let's connect all 5 phrases together. You're too sensitive. You should be more like, I don't need you. If you loved me, you would. You're lucky to have me. Individually, people may dismiss them. They may rationalize them. They may explain them away as jokes, misunderstandings, or personality differences. But when patterns emerge, psychology tells us to pay attention, because patterns reveal structure, and structure reveals truth. Healthy relationships are not built on perfection. They are built on respect, emotional safety, and mutual appreciation. A partner who truly values you does not need to diminish your feelings to feel heard. They do not need to compare you to others to encourage growth. They do not need to remind you of your replaceability to feel powerful. They do not need to guilt you into proving love. And they do not need to position themselves above you to feel secure. Instead, they communicate openly. They express needs without pressure. They disagree without disrespect. They correct without humiliation. And they build without tearing down. So what should you do if you recognize these patterns in your own relationship? The answer is not panic, and it is not immediate confrontation in anger. The first step is awareness. Start observing patterns instead of isolated moments. Ask yourself simple but powerful questions. Do I feel emotionally safe expressing concerns? Do I feel valued for who I am, not just what I do? Do conversations leave me feeling respected or diminished? Do I feel like I am constantly proving my worth? These questions matter because they redirect your focus from emotion to clarity, and clarity is where change begins. Because once you see patterns clearly, you can no longer unsee them. And once you can no longer unsee them, you begin to make different choices. Not out of fear, but out of self-respect. Now I want to leave you with this thought. The strongest relationships are not the ones where no difficult words are ever spoken. They are the ones where even in disagreement, both people still feel valued, still feel heard, still feel respected. Because at the end of the day, love without respect becomes emotional confusion. But love with respect becomes something stable, grounded, and deeply human. If this made you reflect on your own experiences, share your thoughts in the comments. Your insight might help someone else recognize what they've been ignoring for too long. And remember, awareness is not about judgment. It's about clarity. And clarity is the first step toward choosing better for yourself in every area of life.